wanted to show up.
I'm really honored to be on here with you people this evening. I really am.
Well, we've got a good group tonight. I'm pleased that all of you agreed to participate. It would be helpful if we actually had more people to listen to you.
Maybe they will.
Yeah.
I'm retired military, and one of the local organizations I belong to, the program chairman called me up and said, "Sam, I'd like you to give a talk our next meeting." And I said, "Sure, be glad to. Who's going to be sending me the Zoom address?" He said, "What do you mean Zoom?" I said, "We are doing it on Zoom, Army." He said, "No, we're doing it in person at the restaurant." I said, "I think you better find another speaker." I don't plan on attending.
Oh, wow. The tree just stepped in. Good. Thank you, tree.
Yeah, you're not glowing now.
Yeah. The tree is sun coming into this window here. And you know, this is so new now. How would you like to preach to an iPad?
I've done other things to an iPad, but not preaching to it.
Here's what I do. I say, I start off, I say, let everybody please listen. This is not a television program. This is a worship experience. And if you feel like saying amen, unmute for 5 seconds, shout, and then shut up so you can hear me, because this is technological.
You know, most people don't know that if you, while you're muted, if you press down the space bar, it unmutes you. And as long as you hold it down, so you can make a brief comment and let it up and not have to go clicking back and forth and whatever.
Yeah. What happened with me the first time I tried that, I said, well, just unmute and give God a hand clap of praise. They unmuted, but they didn't know how to mute again. And you know, these are not teenagers. You know, this is an elderly congregation, and they were, what? Hello, hey, come on, preacher. I said, wait, no, hold everybody. Push mute, M-U-T-E. That's what we want to do. Praise the Lord. I said, no, hold on.
Yeah.
This is a challenging new time as we face so many from so many sides. Did anybody hear the president's speech today around what they plan to do with the corporate leaders? No. I mean, national leaders. Did anybody listen to what he was saying, or is that later on tonight?
I didn't hear it. I was out.
Yeah.
Oh.
On the 28th, a conversation like I'll be doing a national conversation around mitigation of climate change and what the infrastructure program. I'll be with Raphael Warnock.
Oh, good.
On the 28th at 2:30 Eastern Standard Time. I don't know the platform yet, but we're going to be having a fireside chat, and I'll be asking him about the position from his perspective around infrastructure, things that as they directly relate to the environment and mitigation of climate crisis. With Raphael.
Well, sir, you know that we're having a problem at the Okefenokee. There's a mining company down there that wants to mine Trail Ridge again. And I think Senator Warnock knows about it.
He does?
I think he does.
Tell me, what is that called?
I'd appreciate if you just mentioned to him that if the EPA would step in and say, clean water, you're violating the old Clean Water Act that we're going to reestablish because what's his name? Trump, I guess it is, to stop the Clean Water Act from protecting the Okefenokee.
Is that
Trump's
Okefenokee Swamp?
Okefenokee Swamp Wildlife Refuge.
Yeah.
South Georgia.
Now, are they asking the Senate to do something? What would be appropriate kind of question for him?
Right now, the environmental groups are trying to get the public informed, and we're trying to work with them. But I think the easiest thing to do was reinstate Obama's old wetlands law,
Mhm.
and that would solve it. They couldn't mine.
Yep.
Wetlands. So from his perspective, it would be reinstating Obama's Wetland Act that would
Right.
make the difference down there in the Okefenokee
It
swamp and
would stop
wetland.
them from mining the Okefenokee because
Stop the
under
mining.
Obama, it would have been illegal what they're doing.
Yeah.
Okay,
But Trump did away with the wetlands laws, and so now it's legal to drain
Okay.
the Okefenokee.
Yeah.
okay.
So we
All right,
need,
good.
we need the president to reinstate Obama's wetland laws. He could do it with an executive decision
Yep.
because Trump did away with them with an executive decision.
Okay.
You'd get to heaven if you did that, I think.
Well, I'll do that because I've been talking with Winslow Nazi, who's the chief out of the Apache reservation in Arizona, where an Australian company is coming in now they've got a sacred land and they're coming in to get the copper out there in Arizona.
Right.
And it's really nasty. And they've the Apache tribes under Winslow Nazi, N-O-S-C-E, who's the chief. And this company is coming in to remove the copper, but they've got to destroy all of the sacred burial lands.
Right.
So that's one thing that we're fighting with there.
Okay, let me interrupt you all. For those people who are who have joined us but are not on screen, we're basically just talking a bit while other people are able to join you or to join us. So you are welcome to listen in. If you have a comment, you could unmute yourself and I don't know whether that'll work or not, but you can try if you wanted to make a.
They can raise their hand and I can unmute
Okay.
them. But we're ready to start, gentlemen. It's 5 minutes after.
Yeah, I know. How many people do we have on?
We have about 15 so far.
Okay, counting us.
That is not counting you guys.
Okay, so let's go ahead and start. So I do want to welcome you all to the second in the series of Going from I to We, presented by the Progressive Religious Coalition of Augusta. I'm Andy Reese, the president of the PRC. The members of the PRC, like many of you, are concerned about the political and cultural divisions that have riven our country over the past several years and poisoned our discourse. The simple fact is that if we don't find ways to act together to achieve common goals, our communities and our country will suffer. The first session of this series was presented on December the 3rd. It was titled Finding Common Ground, Bridging Our Differences. Today, partly in recognition of that this is Earth Day, the theme is Our World is One World. Our speakers this evening will present their views on how protecting our air, water, and soil is a common issue around which we can come together for the betterment of our community. Most of you have seen the bios of our speakers. We're going to start with Mark Albertin. Mark's a filmmaker and photographer from Augusta, specializing in documentary work. Over the past 20 plus years, he's produced a number of feature films, many of which have been shown on PBS, but there are two of which he is especially proud. At What Cost? Pipelines, Pollution, and Eminent Domain in the Rural South. And secondly, The Shrinking Sanctuary, Cumberland Island. Both films were used to educate and inform the public about otherwise one-sided views from the representatives and businesses behind personal habitat destruction and pollution. He's currently working on a film in the same vein, The River, the Water of Life, about the spiritual connections that we all share with this planet, regardless of faith, creed, or parity. Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you. And I suggest that you all go to speaker view so that Mark will take your full screen instead of just one corner of it. So.
Thank you, Andy, so much. And I'm honored to be here amongst the other speakers here tonight. I know both of them, and I'm really looking forward to hearing their presentations shortly in a little bit of time here. But I figured instead of staring at this ugly face for 20 minutes or so, I thought it'd be easier to do a little type of PowerPoint presentation to help me kind of guide through what I'm going to talk about and make it a lot more interesting for you all to view. So I'm going to go ahead and share this screen right now. And I'm going to go ahead and go here, and then I'm going to go here, and I'm sure you all can probably see this now. And let me start off. This is my little presentation here, and I call it Disconnect from the Natural World. In this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about my background, the issues that I feel we face, and then the solutions that I feel are out there. So my background, I grew up in rural Wisconsin. We had about 30 acres of land. There was ponds and streams and cornfields and plenty of places for a kid to go out and get into trouble. We caught bullfrogs, we fished all day long. We came home at dark, and I have to tell you, the bottoms of my feet were about as thick in density as a tennis shoe, because all summer long we were out barefoot, climbing trees and doing what have you. So I grew up having a real love for the outdoors. And we had pet Canada geese, as you see in this picture. That's me with one of our Canada geese. We had a pet raccoon. We had all kinds of things. We had a pet blue jay. Living out in the country, you kind of get animals and you're around them all the time. Today, I'm a documentary filmmaker and a photographer. And as Andy had mentioned, I've done a number of different films. Two of them that I'm most proud of are At What Cost? Pipelines, Pollution, and Eminent Domain. That came about in response to a pipeline company called Kinder Morgan, that they were wanting to basically put a pipeline through from South Carolina, going through Georgia, all the way down to Jacksonville, Florida. They were coming to small, depressed towns, and they were saying, look, we're here to bring jobs. We're going to help out your economy. We're bringing oil to this area. This will help with fuel prices. They were going to high schools and elementary schools and giving checks of $5,000 everywhere they went, buying scoreboards and all these different things, trying to endear themselves in these communities. When we all knew after doing research that this was a bunch of baloney. This company did not monitor these pipes like they were saying. And I wanted to expose what was going on to the public so they would have a real rational view of what was going on. So I made this film, and in the film basically told about all the pipes and accidents and all the issues that have happened with this company with breakages and leaks. At the same time, they were promoting themselves in these different communities. There was a leak in Belton, South Carolina with one of their pipes that leaked over 500,000 gallons of petroleum product into the aquifer and ground up there. And they were saying, we monitor our pipes, we keep up with things. Well, I hate to tell you that the problem that happened with that was the landowner found that pipe and smelled the oil and saw the oil slick. It was not Kinder Morgan. Long story short, we sent one of these films to every legislator in South Carolina and in Georgia, and there's a moratorium on that pipeline. It was through a lot of activism, through a lot of people, but for now, we are clear from that nasty pipeline coming to this area. Bottom right picture here, there's a shot with myself, with Sid Gates, a very close friend of mine, and many of you know him. And another woman that came with us, that was at St. Mary's, Georgia. And we were at a rally to try to help protect Cumberland Island from development. My other film that I'm proud of is a film called The Shrinking Sanctuary, Cumberland Island. And it revolved around the potential for development on this beautiful island. And I could see a domino effect happening if it was developed. If anybody built any new structures there, next thing you know, you're going to have somebody saying, well, we need another road. We need to have a little grocery store here. Oh, we need a Walmart now. I could see this island, the sanctuary, going away. And the one I'm working on right now is called The River of the Water of Life. And that's thanks in a huge part to this organization, the PRC, and their background and helping me make this happen. This film is going to be about our spiritual connection to this planet, which we all share. So I'm looking for that. That'll hopefully be done fairly soon. So let me talk a little bit about my presentation here. How do we lose our way? What happened? How did we get to this point? The picture on your right there that you're looking at, those are buffalo skulls. And this is in the 1800s, I'm assuming late 1800s. This is, the pure waste and just horrible practices that were going on that almost wiped out the buffalo. And, I think one of the first things that we talk about is uncontrolled growth. And this is, if you're not familiar with Google time lapse, please check it out at some time. You can find any location on the globe and it will show you from 1984 to 2020, a time lapse of time. And I'm going to go ahead and just click this quick and I'm going to show you what happens with it if my computer wakes up here. So bear with me for a second. Okay, here we go. So you can watch here and you're going to see the growth and the change. That was 1984. Now we're going up to 2000, 2007, 2008, 2016, 2020. And you can see the change in the growth that's happening there. It's pretty astonishing how much growth and how much you see in these other side areas of these different developments happening. When I think back about my childhood, growing up where I did, and having these places to run, to play, to explore, having roads that weren't so busy that if I crossed them, I'd run the risk of getting crushed by a car with somebody flying down it. I think about what we're doing and how we are developing these areas. We are creating places that are not safe for animals or people. Yes, they may be commercially viable, but they are not helping our population. And when we talk about habitat loss, nearly 3 billion birds lost over the past 50 years. Possible causes, habitat loss and chemical pollution. 3/4 of the land-based environment and about 66% of marine environment have been significantly altered by human actions. And urban areas have more than doubled since 1992. We all know this. Take a trip to Atlanta or Charlotte sometime and see how thick and horrible the traffic is. It's unbearable. And we even see that here in the Augusta area, trying to drive out to Grovetown and at the end of the day, and all the people backing up on the expressway for the exits there. I think a big part of our problem right now that we have is that there's a changing perception of what's natural. It's insidious in many ways. Each generation will never know what has been lost because they only know what is in front of them. Their idea of nature may one day be played on a video game. And my point I'm making with this is, when I was growing up in that little town in Wisconsin, it was called Waterville. We had 30 acres of land, and there was all forest and woods and swamp around us. And there was a speckling of homes, maybe 3/4 of a mile to a mile away from where we lived. Not many houses. It was very quiet at night. It was very quiet during the day. When I go back there now, it has changed. That 30 acres of land that we owned has got 6 houses on it now. There are manicured lawns being sprayed regularly with chemicals to keep them bright and green and keep those bugs, those nasty bugs away. And it's a very different world now. If I were a parent, I'd be a little bit concerned about letting my kids go out and roam and explore because the roads are dangerous now. They're busy. There's lots of cars. There's lots of airplanes flying over. It's changed radically. And I think about, well, what's going to happen with the next generation that comes after this generation? Will there be more subdivisions? Will there be a super Walmart out there? Because now you've got this population and people are needing things and they don't want to drive all the way into the next town. That'll even change it even more. Noise pollution from jets and transportation can be heard in some of the most remote areas. In 1981, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency estimated that nearly 100 million people in the United States, that's about 50% of the population, had annual exposures to traffic noise that were high enough to be harmful to health. 80% of the world's population lives under what's known as sky glow. In the United States and Europe, 99% of the public can't experience natural light. I'm the type of person that likes to go out in the country. I'll drive out to like Warrenton in that area, about an hour west, kind of in between Augusta, Georgia and Atlanta, Georgia. You're there in a place where you're kind of between light sources, and you're far enough away from Augusta that you really don't light pollution, and you're far enough away from Atlanta, you don't get a lot of light pollution. So you can actually see the Milky Way there, which is a beautiful, beautiful, gorgeous sight. But with the development that's happening in our western suburbs and the movement from Atlanta moving further east, going into Madison and some of these other towns, I'm sure one day that Milky Way view will go away. And also, one of the things I've also noticed is that I cannot go anywhere in the country, no matter how far away I am from civilization, without hearing a jet or a plane or a train. We have made it so that we are everywhere. We have a fear of the outdoors also. When I see exterminator clubs, exterminator organizations and companies, they perpetuate that insects are all bad. There's an ad here you can see on the right-hand corner that's from not a local pest company, but I just thought, well, that's really ironic. A bee being something that they're back, like this evil creature. If we didn't have bees, we wouldn't be eating right now. So I thought that was idiotic. People are overspraying their lawns with chemicals and pesticides. There was the other day on one of the local roads here in Augusta, I was driving down and there was a big sign that said, "Stop the invaders," and it had a picture of a raccoon. Well, wait a minute, who's invading who here? When we think about this, when we move out to the suburbs, the deer chew on our shrubbery, the raccoons get in our garbage cans, the squirrels chew on the wood of our house and the trim. But this was their turf before we got there. We're invading their area. And then the other thing that's always ironic that I find is how people have to spray their lawns to make these beautiful golf course lawns. And you'll see signs in their lawns, pesticide application, be careful, caution, keep off. And you're letting your kids play in this? Continuing with fear of the outdoors. We've been told nature, who's afraid of the big bad wolf? Little Red Riding Hood and this horrible wolf that's going to eat her up. We're afraid of the skin cancer in the sun. Evil people will take our children. And then we want to make day into night or night into daytime with the street lights and our LED lights. We follow the belief that we are separate from the other creatures on this planet. And even in our scripture, the Christian scripture talks about God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." But there is a difference between dominion and domination. And that's where I think we lose ourselves. An example of what's happened because of this thinking is certain things that we see here, right here. We've gone and slaughtered whales like there's no tomorrow. The buffalo were almost wiped out. Native Americans were persecuted and almost completely wiped out. African Americans were slaves and used as tools in plantations. There was a thinking that I think still persists today that we are somehow separate from everything else. And I think that is very wrong. To me, here's the reality check. Nature heals. Nature, or even viewing scenes of nature, reduces anger, fear, and stress, and increases pleasant feelings. Exposure to nature not only makes you feel better emotionally, it contributes to your physical well-being, reducing blood pressure, heart rate, muscle tension, and the production of stress hormones. It may even reduce mortality, according to scientists such as public health researchers Stamatakis and Mitchell. Nature connects. According to a series of field studies conducted by Kuo and Coley at the Human Environmental Research Lab, time spent in nature connects us to each other and the larger world. Another study at the University of Illinois suggests that residents in Chicago public housing who had trees and green space around their buildings reported knowing more people, having stronger feelings of unity with neighbors, being more concerned with helping each other, and having stronger feelings of belonging than tenants in buildings without trees. In the wilderness, people can find the silence and solitude and the non-civilized surroundings that connect them once again to their evolutionary heritage. and through an experience of the eternal mystery can give them a sense of sacredness of all creation. That is by Sigurd Olson. He's a favorite author of mine, and he had a wonderful vision. When I go out into the woods, when I escape and go to these places, I find myself transformed. I find that it heals me. The details, the small, intricate things you see, the colors. Being in nature brings pleasurable distractions. The colors, the sounds, the details all provide refreshment to the senses that cannot be found in anything man-made. I'm going to tell you quickly about an experience I had recently. During this past year, as you all know, it was a very damaging time. If you were looking at social media, it was a battleground. There was basically a war going on social media. People were fighting each other, arguing with each other. There was violence, there was attacks. It was just things were bad. And I got to the point where I found that my insides were giving me problems. My stomach was giving me problems. My head, I was having headaches. I couldn't sleep. So I did the thing that I knew would help me. I went out into the country. I went to some friend's place out in the country. They had about 90 acres of land with hiking trails. And I found this picture that you're seeing right here. I found this location, this small little creek, and I put my feet in that soft sand at the bottom of this ice cold spring waterfall, the small waterfall. And I sat there and I watched the water flow down further down the hill. And I could feel the pain, the anger, the frustration moving out of my body and flowing down that river. What I started out doing was thinking I was to sit there for about 5 or 10 minutes and refresh. I stayed there for over an hour. I couldn't leave. I was looking at the beautiful jades and the color of the sides of the rocks with the moss. I was looking at the sparkling in the sand of the different rocks and the different colors. And I was listening to that water and the birds up in the trees around me. It was healing me. It was healing me better than any doctor could heal me. It was making me feel renewed. There's no medicine that can fix these problems that we have better than nature. So how do we find our way back? How do we find our way to get back to connecting with nature? When I started this presentation, I had a huge list, limits on noise, water, light, and air pollution, green technologies for energy, more green space, car-free corridors in cities, green tax incentives. But to be honest with you, and here's a quote from Nelson Mandela, children are our greatest treasure, and they are our future. I feel like the source of the problem is us. Our generation and the generations before us have been brought up with beliefs that have caused the situations we now face. In order to correct the problem, in order to find our way back to center, to take that compass where it needs to go, we need to start with the youth. We need to educate them on the earth and our connection to all the creatures we share this wonderful planet with. This education needs to have the same value as reading, writing, and arithmetic. In my view, that's where we're missing out. We can patch this problem with different policies, with different things, but if our population doesn't agree to this, it will never be fixed. We have to educate the youth and change their way of thinking because they're the ones who can learn and change. They always say that kids can learn like languages so much better than us older folks because they can absorb it. This is the time to teach them about the earth and where they're coming from. This is my last slide here, but I just want to leave you with this point that the seeds we plant today will be the forest of tomorrow. That is my view of the future with children and the future of this planet. I believe it's a bright future. We've seen a lot of wonderful changes that have happened during this election period, during the unity. We were talking about this before we got started with this meeting. And so I'm leaving you all with this tonight with hope that we do have a good future and that the next generation will take us where we need to go. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Mark. Unshare. Okay, very good. I appreciate what your words of wisdom there, and the pictures. It just connected me with what we were talking about. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, next up is Sam Booher. Sam grew up in a very small town in West Virginia where he attended a two-room schoolhouse. After graduation from the Citadel, he made the Army his career, retiring in 1985 after 24 years of service and 2 tours in Vietnam. He settled in Augusta, where he had bought a house while he was stationed here at Fort Gordon. Subsequently, he taught school in Columbia County for several years. He served 17 years as co-chair of the Sierra Club Savannah River Group in Augusta and was the chair of the Georgia Sierra Club from 98 to 2003. So Sam, you're up.
Well, I'd like to start with the comments about the Sierra Club and several ways that we benefit our communities, then finish with several comments of how to bring about all Americans back to working together and communicating with each other. As U.S. companies and institutions start to seek atone for a history of systemic racism, the environmental movement is also grappling with a past built on white supremacy and a glaring lack of diversity in its current rank and file. Recently, the Sierra Club's executive director, Michael Brune, wrote that the organization's problematic history from the founder, John Muir, was a racist statement about Blacks and Indigenous people to its current predominancy of white membership. Michael said the first step is to own our mistakes personally and institutionally. There were early leaders in our organization who made harmful and disparaging remarks about Native Americans and Black people, and that hasn't been acknowledged by our organization's leadership for more than a century. So we're owning that now and apologizing for it. The club staff, membership, and volunteers are predominantly white, and the membership skews older. The Sierra Club is multi-generational and multiracial, but not nearly enough. And there's a lot of work to be done in that regard. Willful ignorance is what allows some people to shut their eyes to the reality that the wild places we love are also their ancestral homeland of Native people, forced off their lands in the decades or centuries before they later became national parks. In 2004, the Sierra Club was nearly dismantled after an internal rift grew between those who were advocating for tough immigration restrictions as a way to control environmental damage, and for those who felt such policies were inherently racist. A recent poll conducted by Yale and George Mason University showed that the people of color are more concerned about climate change than white people. The poll found that 49% of white people are concerned, compared with 57% of Black people and 69% of Latino people. Now, several examples of how the Sierra Club locally has helped communities with issues. In the late 1980s, pollution in Georgia's rivers and safe drinking water was the primarily two issues for the Georgia chapter, along with forest protection for nesting migratory birds and stopping the second beltway around Atlanta. At the time, there were no riverkeeper organizations in Georgia. One morning in the late 1980s, I read in a local Augusta Chronicle of a South Carolina minority community located near the Savannah River plant. I forget the town's name. The residents were forced to drink water contaminated with tritium. Because our local group, Sierra Club members, we had Sierra Club members living in South Carolina. I drove over to talk to some citizens to learn what was being done. After talking with several people, I quickly realized nothing was apparently being done. I realized I could not help, but I knew someone who could. Within the Sierra Club at that time, we had paid organizers scattered around America. I had heard of Rita Harris, a Sierra Club organizer who lived in Nashville, Tennessee. I asked the South Carolina chapter chair to call her for help. She responded and drove in and we met. I introduced her to the community's leadership and she got to work. Soon the town started receiving bottled water, followed by a new city well located on the opposite side of town, drawing water from a different aquifer. To this day, I still have no idea how she accomplished the bottled water nor the new well. Today, Rita is on the National Sierra Club Board of Directors. A second community action concerning water contamination. In the 1990s, I received a call from a citizen of Crawfordville, Georgia. They had a problem. It seems like a landowner was planning to build a huge new landfill next to the Ogeechee River in Tolliver County. He planned to fill it with New York City garbage. A train a day would arrive in Sparta, offload the garbage into dump trucks meant for his landfill. The concerned citizens learned that at the same time that all of the Tolliver County commissioners had already signed on to approve the landfill before the public was even aware of it. The call I received asked if I was in the Sierra Club. I said yes. They said we'd like you to meet with them. A couple of dozen citizens met and wanted help organizing to stop the garbage coming into their county. I went with them twice more before they were threatened and told to stop organizing by the landowner's lawyer. When that happened, I told them they needed a lawyer. They did not know anyone that had any experience. I told them I knew someone and I could arrange it for them. I called Justine Thompson, who at the time was head of Green Law, which is a not-for-profit law firm. In the meantime, a city cemetery was found to be partially located on the planned landfill property. The Concerned Citizens Group had already convinced the Crawfordville City Council to oppose the landfill. Because the City Council would not sign a support document agreeing to the landfill, the judge had all the City Council members thrown in jail. Justine had him out the next morning. Early on, I had suggested a rally at the Capitol to draw attention to their issue. Early in the process, they had bussed all of their concerned citizens to Atlanta, and they held a rally at the Capitol wearing yellow t-shirts. They souvenired me one of those t-shirts. Oh, the landfill was never built. Last is an example of our Georgia chapters supporting the statewide community clean water efforts. In the Sierra Club, our national water testing program is conducted locally by members found in our groups all over America. We have over 300 groups scattered about America. These team members are called Water Sentinels. They're located in the local groups and they do monthly water quality testing year-round. In our case here in Augusta, at 10 sites in the CSRA every month. And we add on the Savannah River in the summer prior to local swimming events like the triathlons. The effort is led by Dr. Frank Carl, who many of you may know. In Georgia, this program was started by Alan Toney in Atlanta in the mid-1980s. As Sierra Club testing teams found contaminated streams, they would report their findings to the Georgia EPD. Well, Harold Reheis was head of the Georgia EPD at the time. He did not like getting these calls. He contacted Allen and told him to stop water testing. Allen said he would if EPD would take over the testing program. Reheis agreed. So all of our water sentinels around the state quit their job, quit testing, and Allen got them all certified by EPD. And then they went back to doing what they were doing before, testing streams and rivers in Georgia. Today, it is an outstanding program with citizen groups all over the state participating. In our group, Frank Carl is certifying EPD by EPD and is also certifying people in South Carolina. Georgia EPD has agreed to collect the stream water data from South Carolina and hopes that South Carolina DHEC will someday start a stream water quality testing program. Then Georgia EPD will transfer the South Carolina stream data to South Carolina DHEC. The Sierra Club now realizes that the environment isn't just polar bears and Yosemite National Park. It's also the water in Flint, Michigan, in the air in New Delhi. I was asked also in this talk to discuss some ways we can bring liberals, moderates, and conservatives together working on things to change their community. I'd like to start with who they are and then suggest how to talk to them. A very old idea suggests there are three kinds of people in this world. The first kind of person tends to be preoccupied with self-interest, as everything refers back to I, me, and mine. At the basic level, to them, the world is only divided into winners and losers. Often their only restraints are because of the fear of public shaming, the threat of condemnation, and the punishment by the law. We are number one and America first. Our campaigns aimed to appeal to this first level of life and the basic drive to dominate others. This is a type of person you definitely don't want to be around unless you're looking for negativity in your life. I refer to these people as the people that litter. The second type of person is the spectator. They watch all the action. They spend all their money to go see different types of action. Basically, they watch to see someone win or lose. These spectators are probably worse than the instigators because they get to watch all the action and criticize the people that participate. This person will see an infraction and walk on by. Since they didn't cause pain, they feel no obligation to stop the pain. They listen to gossip and chastise and don't chastise the poisoner. They hear verbal abuse and harsh criticism and don't defend the victim. They ignore signs of abuse. This silence allows their stench to fester and grow. I refer to them as people that ignore the litter. Finally, at the third level, you'll find the participants. They are the action takers, the team players. They are your go-to people. They are the people who have developed the ability to seek solutions that work for all parties, as collections and genuine compromise help forge win-win agreements. This is a true effort to protect the health and the well-being of the human community. Charity organizations and nonprofit projects form along the base of profit-driven businesses. Rather than indulge in blind greed and self-importance, these people undertake noble experiments that seek greater peace, more equality, and justice for all. Instead of the narrowness of, I'm going to get mine, they can be felt sense of being connected to all of humanity. Nothing feels better than having good people around the campfire helping you while you're helping them do the same in return. These are the people that are going to make sure you win. Why? Because they're human, they're kind, and they feel a responsibility for humanity. I refer to them as people that pick up litter. A lot of long-term friendships and parent-child relationships are broken up because someone voted for Trump. But now, after the attack on the Capitol on 6 January, things are different. Dropping a close or long-term relationship over Trump is almost a basic morality, core value, or character issue. Our relationships are now a lot harder to reestablish. So how do we talk to a past friend that is now a Trump supporter? I still have two. Both I've known for over 30 years. We do talk, but not very often. Last, I will end with a personal recommendation. When we talk, I try to never mention Trump's name, and when he does, I reword what he said by dropping the name. Then I try to turn the discussion to a topic that we can still agree on. Can we both support the Georgia Bulldogs this year? Or can we agree that whatever happens in America, we want to retain a democracy in America? That we do not want to see another civil war in America? The last one I talked to said, it might be going to happen. And my response would be, but can we agree that we do not want to see it happen? A recent Pew Research Center reported political polarization is more intense now than at any point in modern history. Nearly 80% of the Americans now have just a few or no friends across the aisle. Our animosity is now going both ways. If an old friend were to ask me if I think Trump is a racist, how should I respond? Are they assuming I'm sort of a horrible racist because they think I like Trump? My first response is the book of Proverbs, chapter 15, verse 1. It reads, a gentle answer deflects anger, but harsh words tempers flair. We may never know why some of our friends went for Trump, but it may have been the domestic terrorist attack in Charlottesville, Virginia, and wanting to protect America and keep us safe. My recommendation is to recognize their motives as genuine, treat them with respect, and keep the conversation civil. Do your best to communicate. Do your best to hear their heartfelt concerns rather than dismissing their concerns as if baseless. Share your point of view with clarity and grace. Arguing with a Trump supporter does not help. Neither does shaming them or insulting them. So what does help? Approach their topic with compassion. Be respectful and loving, not smug and condescending. Do not underestimate their intelligence and knowledge of the person you're talking to. You could be embarrassed. Political persuasion does not have a good track record. Try to engage in active processing. Example, do not say, how could you support such a racist candidate?
Sam, you've muted yourself.
I don't know how I did that.
Callan.
Personal persuasion does not have a good track record. Try to engage in active processing. For example, you could say, how could you support a racist candidate? Instead say, doesn't this stuff remind you of what he said? Well, I'm repeating, aren't I? Maybe ask about turning our country over to someone who has no interest in leading it. Could we have, if you have a business-minded friend, ask, do you support turning our country over to someone who does not pay his vendors? Last, if a person says they love Trump, just say, can you tell me why? Before you use Trump's name, instead consider asking your friend, what do you think of the police killing black people? They answered, then asked, well, what do you think of Black Lives Matter? Maybe start by asking, what do you think of Senator John McCain? Was he a good Republican senator? Kill them with kindness, then pass them some more potato chips. There is an organization that can help a family if one of the adults or an older son or daughter loves hate. That is Peace, Parents for Peace. It's a 501c3 nonprofit based in Chicago. They have a newsletter you can sign up for online, and their phone number is 1-844-49-PEACE. They will help a family that is desperate for a loved one to escape a hate group. A wife recently contacted them. It seems her husband drank every night, then went online looking for hate groups. After she called them, they sent her an interventionist. Last, I'd like to end with my personal suggestion for fighting systemic racism. Every major corporation is required to hold an annual shareholders meeting. At that meeting, any shareholder that wishes can speak. However, this means you will get an immediate, quick answer from the CEO. While his response to your question may or may not be on topic, the CEO will quickly move on to take another question so we can soon finish. So instead, I suggest a phone call or letter from you, preferably if you're a shareholder, to a corporate office could be very effective. Any shareholder can at any time write and say, what is our company's current published plan to fight racism? As a shareholder, you should be asked for and expect to be sent a copy of the corporate plan. You can review what the company says, and you could send the plan on to somebody who will do a lot more in-depth review. If this request could be done in an organized manner by one or more organizations, they could ensure most key corporations in America get asked about their position on systemic racism and what they are doing to ensure it does not exist in their companies. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Sam. A lot of information about how one person can make a difference, but particularly if they are a part of an organization that multiplies their power. So I appreciate it. Next up is Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley. He began his leadership in the civil rights movement and struggle for human right dignity as a student body president at Tennessee State University, and also his involvement in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in the 1960s. He's been around. He was a Peace Corps volunteer in Nigeria, program manager at the U.S. Department of Education, served 25 years as pastor of the historic Providence Missionary Baptist Church in Atlanta, and is just finishing his term as chairman of the board of the Interfaith Power and Light. A PhD in urban education and psychology from the University of Massachusetts provided the background to combine the disciplines of faith and science with the lessons he had learned as a civil human rights advocate. He believes God created a perfect, ecologically balanced world for humans to care for, but we are destroying it at an alarming rate. Saving our environment will require cooperation and buy-in from the educational, scientific, business, political, and faith communities. Gerald, I'm looking forward to what you have to say about how our faith impacts on the environment and our living together.
Good evening to all of you who have joined us from all across America, and particularly in Augusta and here in the Georgia area. As I sat here and listened to my colleagues, Mark and Sam, I learned so much. I was humbled. excited to hear the in-depth analysis that they went into in their personal lives that have brought them to this point. As I listened to the small beginnings of Mark and what he was doing and how he is doing and how he is continuing to challenge the inequities that we face today. As I listened to Sam, and institutional racism is something that for 60 years I've challenged over and over, and particularly after the results of what has just transpired in Minnesota, I wondered, what could I say? And then I thought about my friend Andy Reese, who pulled this together, and I said, do you X him as your friend because he put you behind these two eloquent, insightful, wise speakers? So Andy, when this is over, do not call me again, please. I do not want to be in this position, but I'm grateful and thankful that you put me here, and I'll try to share some of the remarks that I have. I want to congratulate the Progressive Religious Coalition of Augusta for bringing this extremely important topic in 2021. And I'm so glad to be here because this is an exciting day that challenges America. America is being challenged on many fronts now: educational fronts, litigation fronts, environmental justice fronts, justice around political brutality, and many fronts. But I think this is an exciting day for Earth Day, because 51 years ago, a group of individuals and organizations realized that the environment was being compromised and literally being destroyed by human-induced insensitivity. They researched and they began to understand what was fossil burning fuel and what did it do and how did it add to CO2 in the environment. And they saw that it was, the CO2 was impacting the overall quality of life at an alarming rate. And 51 years ago, new terminology entered into our lexicon. Words like that I'd never heard of: greenhouse effect, fossil burning fuel, CO2, carbon dioxide. These were only a few of the words that average Americans had no knowledge of what was going on, because America was moving into a period. We want to have a more comfortable lifestyle. I want my lights on all night. I want air conditioning. I want heat. I want to drive the largest car. I want to go to places. It's our time. We've worked hard all doing from the Industrial Revolution to now. So fossil burning fuel, so what? What does it matter? I'm cool, I'm warm, I can go here and there. But 51 years ago, there was a concerted group of people that said we need to look at what we're doing to the overall environment. We began to realize more and more that the more we demanded for our own personal comfort, the more it demanded energy. And the more energy it demanded, the more it took away from the overall environment that God had provided for us. And we began to drive larger vehicles, and we began to laugh, and we began to talk. But whenever you do something, there is always something where you're going to pay in the end. We wanted the comfortability, and our access of what we wanted is now coming to a head. 51 years later, we're facing what I've coined a new phrase, Sam and Mark, called the climademic. I know we talk about the pandemic, but I've coined a new phrase, the climademic. The climademic, which will become much more deadlier than the current pandemic, because it will destroy human life, animal life, plant life, water, air, anything that is essential for the quality of life. The climademic is a precursor. The pandemic was a precursor to the climademic, which is destroying, and it is no respect of whether you're white or black or gay or tall or black or short. It will destroy at the heart of the environment. I'm only a decade-old convert into the climate movement. This was not something that I looked for. I was always involved in the civil and human rights dimension, joining in the civil rights community in 1959 and 60 with a young preacher, Martin Luther King, And down there, I was 18 years old, and I met another young man next to me. He was an old man. He was 20 years old. I was 18 and he was 20. His name was John Lewis. And then this old man, C.T. Vivian, was 34. And we said, what can an old man teach us? 1960 there in Nashville, Tennessee. Our goal was to vote. And we knew that it was our constitutional right as American citizens to vote. So we faced all of the sit-ins and all of the bus-ins and all of the just racism that was so paramount in 1960. I'll never forget my senior year when we marched to Washington in 63, and we were so excited to come back because the hope of maybe changing the attitude of America to allow us to vote, our constitutional right was there. But then as president of the student government, John Kennedy was killed on November the 22nd, and all our hopes and dreams began to go down. But I said, wait a minute, this is the land of the free, the home of the brave. So what we've got to do is look at that constitutional right. And we talked, and then we managed to fight for freedom, equality, and justice. Freedom, equality, and justice. The right for all people to have the right to vote and buy where they can afford to buy, equal access to education. And that was my goal. But there's always something in your life that will change. And I fought for that for so many years, and the voting rights were passed and the human rights were passed. But then in recent years, 10 years ago, here in Atlanta, Georgia, I'm thinking that we've passed and gone through many of the angst and the anger and the attitudes of individuals to suppress other people from their constitutional rights. And I met a young lady who said, would I come out and speak with her? She took me out to a place where there was a large group of evangelicals. And I sensed I was a pastor. I said, well, these are nice gentlemen who are going to be talking about what the environment and what we're doing to help God's creation, the perfect, balanced, ecological world. So I went out with this young lady, and they began to say, why are you talking about this? Don't you realize that we've got to make a profit in America, and those that run our countries and all the under the name of Christianity, those that are running the country, we're providing what America wants, a much more comfortable lifestyle, regardless of whether it's fossil fuel or carbon dioxide in the air. And they began to really criticize the young lady that brought me there. They asked me, why are you here? And she happened to be a white lady, and they asked me, was I by her bodyguard? Now, I don't know why a 6'5" black man standing with a white lady would be considered a bodyguard. I said, no, I'm just riding with her. I didn't know her that well, but she said, would I come out? When we finished, they asked me for a PowerPoint. I said, the only PowerPoint I have is a pointing up to heaven. I don't have a PowerPoint technology, but I do say this, that what we're doing to the environment, what she's saying is that we've all got to work together. Her name was Jane Fonda. She said, can I introduce you to my husband? I said, who is Ted Turner? That's why 10 years ago, and Captain Planet, I could have cared less about polar bears, tree deforestation, carbon dioxide in the air. What did fracking mean to me? What did I know about methane gas? I was concerned about police brutality, teenage pregnancy. How do we come together as a people and make a nation live up to its moral and ethical responsibilities? But there's always something in our lives, and maybe that's why the 51st anniversary of Earth Day is important, that we remind ourselves that we're all in this together, that there are no blacks, no white, because the climate crisis is no respecter of your color, your race, your sexual orientation. It cuts right to the core of life. So as a Christian pastor, I began to look at all of the kinds of words that were put into the Christian nuances and what we talked about, that God created a perfectly balanced ecological world, and that if we took care of it, but we were not taking care of it, we began to put profits over people, and people began to suffer at an alarming rate. And then I really began to understand that the new movement, the civil and human rights movement was in 60, but the new movement for 20 and 21 was the environmental movement, because everybody deserves a constitutional right to clean water, clean air, toxic-free environment. So I began to say, let me change up, and I began to shift, and I met people like Sally Bingham and other people, and Mark Yagi at the river keepers and other people, some on this call today, and Andy, and I begin to connect the dots. Because you see, if we're going to come to this, we've got to connect the dots. We've got to understand that we're in a moral and an ethical warfare against those that would say, how do we just continue to make more and more, but we're destroying ourselves, so that Mark can go back to the countryside and see that it is pristine as it once was. So we all have to come together. So then I begin to see that now the major movement that Dr. King says, we are the consciousness, the soul of America. And I began to think, what is the soul of America? The soul of America, the soul is something where you get involved mentally, psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. The soul is what keeps you alive. And what keeps us alive today is the environment. So that's the soul of America. The environment, if the environment is the soul of America, then we've got to have a moral and an ethical consciousness where the foundation of the business, scientific, and political world can rest upon the moral efficacy of what we're about. So now and I use the term when I started, excited, because when I got into the movement a few years ago, I went to several meetings and I met some of the most intelligent people that I've ever known. I've met some of the people that had a lot of money. I traveled with Ted and with Laura and Rutherford and other people, very well heeled people in terms of finances, ecstatically smart. I joined in with Mothers for Fluoridation and Mothers for Clean Air, and we were going to all of these meetings, lobbying, but something was missing. Something was missing, and what I found was missing is what we're talking about tonight. Enthusiasm, excitement. You've got to be excited about enthusiasm. In Greek means in theos, or in God, and if God is governing your life, then you ought to be excited. So I began to connect the civil rights movement with the human rights movement, with the environmental movement. And tonight on Earth Day, the 51st day, we've got to be excited as we move back into the Paris Agreement, as we begin to talk about what businesses can do, as we begin to look at from the Islamic point of view, from the Jewish point of view, from the Buddhist point of view. All faiths begin to talk about how do we come back to that creative force that brought it all together, that we in our myopic, narcissistic, selfish, profit-oriented society destroyed that. So it's an exciting time when we can come back together and look at what it is that we can do, not to be chagrined, not to be saddened, but to say, this is our moment in time. With all that's going on in Minnesota, that's going on now in Kentucky, that's going on January the 6th. Those of us on this call, we now constitute those who are championing the soul of America, the environmental soul. When we talk about the fracking, when we talk about alternative energies, when we talk about wind and solar, these are just not words. These are something that can come into for this clandemic, I like that, clandemic that we're getting ready to go into, that we can start talking about new jobs. We can start talking about solar jobs. We can start talking about wind and biomass. That's what we've got to do. We've got to start with our college children. Somebody said we need to talk about our elementary schools. I'm going to historically Black colleges and universities and saying, fine, it's good to talk about sociology and psychology, but we've got to look at the alternative energies. Why? Because it ties into health, it ties into the economics, it ties into political lifestyle. So this is why this is so important today. We sing a song in the African American church, I'm on the battlefield. I said, don't sing the song to me anymore about being on the battlefield. We've got to be in the battle. There's a difference between being on the battlefield and in the battle. We are in a moral, ethical battle for the survival and the consciousness of the survival of the environment. Luke said, I'll never forget what David wrote in Psalms 104. Our survival depends on the natural world, which in turn depends on God. The Buddhists say, cut down the forest of desire, not the forest of trees. In Islam, they say, have you not considered how Allah sets forth a parable of the good word being like a good tree whose root is firm and whose branches are in heaven? Judaism, see my works as lovely as they are, fine as they are, they care not to corrupt the trees. Our world is one world. The climate crisis is about our world, not about whether you're Republican or Democrat, this is a nonpartisan issue, and it's our time now. The business community, the political community, the scientific community actively getting involved as an interfaith effort to move toward a desired solution. When we come to that cognitive and spiritual awareness, then we begin to understand this is our time now. I say to all of you who are with us tonight, to obey the commandment that transcends all faith, and that is take care of my creation. Dr. King said, we must preserve the soul of America, and the soul of America is the environment. He said, we cannot do it alone. We've all got to come together. And I believe that this is our moment. No, I'm not here to be some inspirational speaker. I'm not here to talk about how to pump you up. I'm not here to say, are you excited about what you're doing? That ought to be already inside of you because of all the degradation that we feel and all of the political kinds of jockeying back and forth. We have an obligation tonight on the 51st anniversary, on the 30th anniversary, now to take what Mark and what Sam and what Andy and what the Sierra Club has been talking about, to break down all of these barriers. He talked about institutional racism and the privileged attitude of those in corporate America. We will only survive when we all understand that a flood doesn't know whether you're black or white. A wildfire doesn't say whether you have money or not. Asthma, like down there, the 85-mile cancer corridor in Louisiana, where 150 energy companies are pouring all of that sickness and death into their areas. It does not care. So therefore, the obligation now tonight, for those of us on this call, for those of us who've made a commitment, for those of us who can connect the dots between the moral and ethical and political and business and scientific communities, it's all about all of us. All ships will rise together. We've got to get away. And let me say this, after 60 something years, I am more optimistic now than I've ever been. When I saw what happened after the George Floyd, and I saw young blacks and whites taking it to the streets and asking hard questions. That's why this new bill that they're talking in Washington about, in terms of the infrastructure, we're talking about jobs, new jobs. We're talking about clean energy jobs. We're talking about lifting up people. We're talking about how it all interconnects. So I'm thankful tonight just to be here to say, I just want to be a small part of the interconnectedness that has been discussed on tonight's call. And when you leave here, something ought to bother you. Something ought to challenge you. Something ought to make you a little nervous. Something ought to make you excited to say, wait, when I get up tomorrow, I don't know whether you're going to sign a bill. I don't know whether you're going to be in Oak Flat, Arizona out there with the Apaches, what they're fighting out there, or other issues that have been discussed tonight. But you should not go to bed tonight comfortable until we're all comfortable. Dr. King says, none of us will be free. None of us will feel equal until we're all free. We're in this together. Our world, one world. Thank you.
Thanks, Gerald. You may not have been trying to inspire us, but I think you did it anyway. Yeah, we are in, it is the moral question of our time about what we do right now about the environment and whatever. So at this point, I'm going to open it up. First of all, do you panelists have questions for each other? And Gregory, we don't have that many people signed up. Do you want to just promote everybody to a panelist so that we can see each other and ask questions directly?
I think that might be a bit confusing. But I do have a couple of questions on this end.
Okay, go ahead.
So Joyce Law would like to ask Reverend Dr. Durley, do you see more African-American ministers joining the environmental movement perspective as part of human rights?
Yes, I do. And I say that because before there was some reticence, there was some hesitance, because it was always viewed as a privileged group of people who had enough resources to go and look at the waterways and look at the trees and talk about the environment. when we were concerned about the day-to-day issues of poor education, inaccessibility to healthcare. But now we have deliberately been connecting the dots that you cannot talk about one issue without talking about the other. So there is a growing, not only among the faith community, but also among, when I talked to like with Al Sharpton and the National Action Network and the NAACP and the Urban League with Mark Mariel, they're beginning to understand that, but it had to be an education of that because we were, and I think Sam addressed that, we were deliberately excluded from that, or we felt that we were, because there was another group that talked about that, and we were the end results of the toxic waste dump, the environmental injustice issues. So we're saying if we're concerned about equity, then we've got to understand the justice issue and begin to pull that into it, into the issue. So yes, there is a growing knowledge of that. I made a tour of 22 historically Black colleges and universities, and I began to talk to the students now about the majors that they take in terms of the environment. They never saw that as a livelihood or way of life. So I'm saying, don't put up solar panels, start a solar panel company, start a wind solar company. So we're starting at the college level, going into the faith level, and going on into the political arena.
Sam, well, the three speakers, do you have questions or comments for each other?
I have a question for both of our other speakers. I'd like to ask Andy, if that's all right.
Sure.
We all tonight been talking about how we need to come back together, that this is an issue that we're facing, this environmental issue, and that Dr. Durley, you're talking about, that it's going to, doesn't matter. The climate's not going to give a darn what color you are, if you're tall or short. You said that earlier on. It's going to affect us all if we don't fix this problem. Do both of you feel optimistic about the new direction that we're seeing in our administration? Compared to where we were, it's a lot better, but do you think we're moving fast enough?
Sam, you're going to have to unmute if you want to speak.
I think we're getting there, but I think we have a whale of a ways yet to go. I think a lot of elected Republican officials at the congressional level would like Trump not to be around, and they can salvage the Republican Party. I think they think as long as Trump is trying to play a role in the Republican Party, they've got problems. And as long as they think they have problems, they're not interested in voting on the things that need to get done. And I think we're moving in the right direction, but we're nowhere near being able to get them on board.
Yeah, I think it's two good friends when we fought here in Georgia to get John and Raphael elected and working in the 19 rural counties and all of that. And I looked at Trump, and I've seen the Trump, but I saw Jim Wallace. I saw George Wallace, in Alabama. Yeah. I saw some of the Dixiecrats years ago in their staunch refusal in 1985, Orwell Forbes, when they said you will not come into Central High School. And there were abject just against, for whatever reason, at that time. So when I see a Trump and him rallying up the troops, it should make us much stronger to understand that justice will roll down like mighty stream. Now, sure, these are just words, but I believe that he's opened up a wound that allows us now to become much more optimistic and much more stronger. And this is just a tip of what we saw in Minnesota when they broke the blue line. And I think around the environment, Sam, and as I look, and it gets me. I chair Interfaith Power and Light. We're in 40 states, 22,000 houses of worship. And here I am sitting on the board, the only person of color. And I'm wondering, have we reached that? And as I talk to Susan and Sally Bingham and others, we've got to go beyond that, not just at the board level, but all throughout our affiliates. And I think that with what Bruno's doing in Sierra Club, that's got to occur. Does an organization get stronger because it has diversity in it? Yes, it does, because it brings in all of those diverse attitudes and opinions. And I think that that's what's beginning to happen right now. And I think this administration is beginning to realize that and has opened up the doors. But unless those of us at the grassroots level, unless we begin to understand we will not bend, we will not bow, we will not break, nor will we back up. We're going to stay right there. I never thought that I'd be once again trying to champion a voting rights bill named in John Lewis after 60 years. I never thought that. So it is a cycle, in particular around the environment, that we're going to have to stay there. And those of you who've been in it much longer than me, I'm joining in forces with you in trying to bring our troops along to understand that it's all interrelated. When you take any group of people, put poor education, inaccessibility to healthcare, no jobs, put them in a small contained neighborhood and put the temperature at 110 degrees every day, that's a cauldron for violence. And so we've got to reduce all of those ecological factors that contribute to that kind of violent environment. So it's a violent environment from a personal, psychological, and a weather issue. So we've got to begin to pull those things apart. And yes, it's going to be a challenge, and that we've got to put in. And that's why voting is so important. And that's why even the suppressive laws here in Georgia are trying to stop the voting of the people speaking their rights for the equity to come in for the sustainability of the environment and human life.
Thanks. Gregory, do we have another question from the audience?
We do. There's a question about where do we start in making a change, and what more can we as individuals do to create that change for all the panelists?
Okay, Sam, you talked about that a little, quite a bit at the end of your talk. So maybe let the others speak, and then you can reinforce some of the things you already said. Okay. Mark?
Dr. Durley, you want to go ahead with this one?
Well, I don't want to dominate. I've said enough tonight. I've run my mouth enough. I've said enough, and it comes down to an individual commitment. At the end of my remarks, it always comes down to an individual. We, and tonight, each person must make that. The two words that kept us strong in the movement were two words, and I think to start, these two words must come to us. The two words that push me now: what are you willing to sacrifice, and what are you willing to risk? If you're not willing to sacrifice anything or risk anything, nothing will change. And that comes to an individual, and each brick makes a wall, and a wall makes a building. So that's where it starts, with the individuals. And here's a key word: communication. And communication is predicated upon three things. Do we understand each other? Do we respect each other? And can we have trust? If we don't understand, nor respect, nor trust, we don't communicate, and it won't happen. So we start, once I make a commitment that I'm willing to sacrifice and risk, then I'll communicate with you. Right now, that communication is very fuzzy. So we've got to drop that and go into communication. That's what I'm thinking about now, as to what do we do now? And it's an individual effort.
You know, and I think that I agree with you completely on that, Dr. Durley. I think that the time that we all are going to make a difference, whether it's you're in the grocery store and you say, I've got a reusable bag instead of buying a damn plastic bag, which, you know, there's a million of those flying all over the place, or whether it be when you're making conscious decisions, what businesses you will support. You can look and see online and find out about a number of different businesses that are maybe doing things that are bad for the environment, that are connected to products that you might buy. In our world, what influences things is where it's hitting their pocketbook, as you could say. If you stop buying, and if the public stops buying, they're going to bend, because that's how we have control. And so that is one of the ways that we don't realize as a population, how we can make these businesses change and move in the direction we need them to move. But I think that the time is now. I think when I hear these two speakers that we've had tonight, Sam and Dr. Durley talking, it's sad that we're seeing the situation that was going on in the 60s happening. It's still going on. I used to watch Star Trek as a kid, and I used to always be amazed that on the bridge of Star Trek, you all remember that show, it was so wonderful, because by this point in time, supposedly, all of us, they had a mixture of different races all working together on the bridge. They all were unified. And that these people were going out and exploring. They were accepting new beings and new people and new species as equals. They weren't looking at them as, oh, that's beneath me or lesser than I am. And I think that's where, we haven't quite made it to the Star Trek era yet. I hope that someday we will be unified as a nation, as a world, and that we will see people, as human beings, and not by, we think they're this way, and we'll see this environment, the earth, the creatures on this planet, not as being something that we can destroy or use for our own profit and advantage, but a wonderful gift that was given to us by our Creator.
Hey, Sam, go ahead.
Andy, I have a comment.
Sure.
If I was out there and I got an interest in what you heard tonight and wanted to do something, I think I would call up a friend and say, I'd like to go visit some organization's next meeting. It doesn't have to be the Sierra Club, it could be any organization, Audubon, and there's other organizations that care about the environment and are trying to do something. So get a friend to go with you, or if you've got the willpower at all, just go yourself and drop in on a monthly meeting. Now, I know most of them are on Zoom right now, but probably 6 months, 8 months from now, there'll be in-person meetings. But someone that's heard us tonight and is interested, just make contact with an organization that's doing something and say, I'm interested, what can I do? Water testing, us or the Savannah River Keepers also does water testing. So, go out, reach out to an organization, try to, maybe if you feel more comfortable, ask a friend you have to go with you. And so I think that would, an individual could do to take that first step.
The name of this series is going from I to we, from the individual to the community. And, so that's kind of what you're talking about, is finding your community to multiply your strength. What concerns me is, how do we get people to do that? As I said, I think this is a moral issue. Gerald talked about that eloquently, framing it in moral terms. It's what religion's about. Religion is about giving up our individual selfishness to work for the good of the group and for all of creation. So anybody want to tackle that? How do we talk to these people, the ones that Sam were talking about, that sees the garbage and walks by? I'm not sure that the ones who are actually littering are much we can do right now. We'll have to move them to the watchers first. But I wish there were a magic wand that we could wave to get people to start broadening their outlook. Gerald, you've spent a career doing that from the pulpit. Any suggestions?
Well, not only, one of the things that I found, not only, all those years as, a college administrator and then as a psychologist and now and a pastor, is that people tend to move from self-interest. And if it's unfortunate that people tend to listen to you or listen to what they need to do when they face two things: when they face tragedy or old age. They get so old that they say, maybe I better do something right, or something tragically happened, and now where is God? So I think that now the pandemic, as I keep saying, is a precursor to the climademic.
Yeah.
It's a precursor for Chinese have been wearing masks for years in other countries, but now this has been uncomfortable to us. Mothers and fathers are saying, wait a minute, I didn't know that you were like this. We've never been in our house together this long. Our children are finally saying, wait, wow, this is horrible. I can't go to school. So we're being crunched. And so now we're coming into a whole new modality of worship, of working with each other. And I think when the climate, it hasn't hit yet. When you hit 100 degrees for 25 to 50 days, when you see asthmatic conditions, when you see cancer at an alarming rate, when you see wildfires destroying entire cities, and when you see tsunamis and earthquakes, then people, once they say this, what do we need to do? Then that's the critical point. Right now, I don't know if we've reached it, because see, look how quickly we're coming off the pandemic. Atlanta is a wide open city now, no masks, no social distancing, everything is open. Now, I believe that there is a deity, a supreme being, something greater than us. And in this Kairos moment, we're going to say, wait a minute, we're drowning, we're burning, we're dying at an alarming rate much faster than the pandemic. And now what do we do? And it's at that point, we've got to understand what it is that we need to do legislatively, politically, scientifically. How did they come up with this vaccine so fast? But there is no vaccine for climate change except us. We are the vaccine. The vaccine where you can go for this Johnson & Johnson or Moderna or Pfizer. And people now, they've got so much vaccine, they can't even get it out. But for this, we've got, and it hasn't reached that point where we really believe it. And there are those that have been in it much longer than me, talking about the plastic in the ocean, talking about the pollution, talking about the sea level rising, talking about the diminished, what's happening in Greenland and Iceland and the melting glacier. But these are remote thoughts in the average American's mind. But when the air conditioning does not work and brownout has come in, then they will come back. So we just got to be diligent to keep putting our message out there until that critical moment occurs and the politicians and the business people can understand it. We know that in 7 to 8, 10 years, we will not have the cars that we have now. They'll be electric, because it's slowly getting, that message is getting out. So all we can do now, those of us who are really concerned, that have some kind of insight, is to keep saying that until that moment comes when America says, wait a minute, I don't need 9 home. I can turn my lights off. I can still have a beautiful life, and I can do something that's real weird, something that's strange, something that's alien. Guess what? I can begin to speak to my children again. Maybe I can talk to my wife. Maybe I can take my dog out for a walk rather than running and grabbing. Until we reach that point, Sam and Mark and Andy, I think it's going to be challenging. In the African-American community, we reached that a long time ago. What do we do now? But we've been forced, because of the whole racist thing, to be squeezed into a box. And we're saying that now people are beginning to understand it's not about your color. It's not about your faith. This is bigger than all of that. And once we understand that, then we come together as a unified body to sustain what God gave us.
Gregory, we got any more comments, questions?
We had one, but I think we're just about out of time. So
Okay, Sam, you have one more comment?
I'd like to see somebody put up a sign in South Augusta that says beachfront property for sale.
It's coming. These are the sandhills. They were beachfront at one time.
It's going to be again if we don't do something.
Okay, y'all, I thank you for your participation. For those of you who joined us audibly but not visually, I appreciate your being here. The PRC is committed to continuing this series. We will be talking about whether to have one in the summer or wait until the fall, but keep your eyes open for further development. So thank you all again.
Thank you all. Thank you, Andy. Thanks. Good seeing you all again.
Thank you, Mark, Sam.